All right. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, all you magnificent melon heads of the world. Happy Tuesday, everybody. Today's April 15th, 2025, tax day. Rut-row. Time to give Uncle Sam his pound of flesh. And the top story this morning is, of course, the trade war. Are we having trade war fatigue yet? Is there tariff fatigue? I had tariff fatigue before Liberation Day even got here. And I'm kind of sick of talking about it, but guys, this is the biggest story in the world. This is the biggest story in years since COVID, arguably. So we got to cover this. And the latest salvo being fired today, it's a big one. China has ordered a halt to deliveries of Boeing jets. Now, this is a slight escalation in the rhetoric. Mathematically, this isn't really any different than we were yesterday, but rhetorically, it's an escalation. Now, why do I say that? Because China's already placed 125% tariffs on American goods, right? That's in retaliation to our 145%. At that point, it's a de facto ban. Right? Nobody's going to pay 125% tariffs unless it's like something you're going to die without. And so when China has now banned deliveries, they've ordered their airlines to not take deliveries of Boeing jets. That's more than a tariff. That's more than a tax. They're outright saying, don't buy the planes. Okay, yes, that's a rhetorical escalation. But again, they weren't going to buy the planes anyway because of the 125% tariff. So that is the latest thing flying around. Now, look, guys, this one just by itself, when you think about it, Boeing's commercial airliner sales are roughly 1% of United States GDP. All right, roughly. We're using big round numbers here. But this is a significant industry. Selling of airliners can move the needle on the entire U.S. economy. And then within that category of Boeing's airliner sales, China makes up about 20%. So a de facto ban on airliner deliveries to China by itself right there is a 0.2% decline in GDP. So this is just one category, airliners. We haven't talked about furniture, autos, pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, any of the other myriad things that we sell and buy from China. Just this one story, 0.2% of GDP down the drain. Trade wars are messy. Trade wars are destructive. And look, don't think this is like, oh, China's got America over the barrel. Nope. Chinese people like to fly, don't they? Don't they like to go places? Do you think Airbus is just going to sell twice as many planes? You know how long it takes to build these things? And by the way, about half of China's existing commercial fleet is Boeing jets that need regular replacement of engines and parts that are now de facto banned. So what's going to happen to Chinese airlines? Are planes going to start falling out of the sky in China because they can't maintain the planes, but they flew anyway because they're corrupt, greedy pigs and they just decided to kill people to save money? I don't know. But again, guys, when governments fight, it's always we who pay the price, whether it's the United States and Europe, the United States and China, China and Europe, whoever. The average person pays the price while the politicians pound their chests and claim victory. This one's going to get messy over here. Now, Airbus is clearly the winner here. Airbus is going to come out of this. They're eventually going to sell more planes. Maybe China's own domestic airline business. There is a company that makes commercial airliners in China. They're really small, nowhere near the size of an Airbus or a Boeing. Also going on this morning, we've got South Korea has pledged $23 billion in support for its chip sector. Now, we've been hearing some stories about this, pledging support from governments, and this is in particular in countries that are militarily very dependent on the United States. For example, Taiwan, South Korea, to a lesser extent, Japan. They're not firing back. That's the big thing. South Korea, I mean, their finance minister was out in the news today saying the bond market is making these big deficits difficult to run, all kinds of problems associated with trying to finance your industries. But South Korea is not retaliating. And the reason why I find this so important is because late last week, there was this story going around in social media that was pure BS propaganda. This story was going around that China, South Korea, and Japan were working together to fight back on Donald Trump's oppressive tariff regime. It was straight up communist propaganda planted in American social media because Japan and South Korea have not retaliated at all There are no big meetings happening with Chinese government officials. How do we get back at Big Bad Orange Man? That was a straight up lie being perpetuated on American social media by Chinese bots. All right. And that is a rampant industry. I see it in the comments of my own live streams all the time. Be very careful in what you're consuming and always kind of side eye that stuff, guys. It doesn't always present itself as obvious propaganda. And it's really hard to spot sometimes. They're getting better and better at sneaking it in there. But there's a lot of that flying around. Absolutely. And of course, American press is happy to repeat it. That's the other thing you have to understand. Anything that makes China look like this big insurmountable dragon and makes America look weak right now, they are going to run that front page with all attribution. I mean, just absolutely focus on that. Why? Because Orange Man bad. So just keep that in mind. And look, trade wars are messy. There is going to be pain on both sides. And I really don't know if we're doing the right thing here. Almost certainly doing it clumsily. Even if we are doing the right thing, we're doing it the wrong way. But that being said, keep in mind, there's a lot of people that are kind of rooting against the trade war for their own reasons. And those reasons have nothing to do with the trade war. Also going on this morning, and this is another one that really got under my skin yesterday. President Trump has floated a reprieve for automotive tariffs on auto parts. Auto stocks, in particular, GM went flying yesterday. Now, this is not on paper. This isn't official. Trump just said a thing in the Oval Office. He floated the idea. That's the text there. But this is another case of the big guys get carve-outs while small business is screwed. And I went on a tirade about this yesterday when they did the same thing with electronics and semiconductors. The big businesses can afford lobbyists. The big businesses can afford to buy themselves carve-outs. Small businesses can't. And since when I said before that we're going about this the wrong way, even if this is the right thing to do, maybe it is, we're doing it the wrong way. 145% tariffs that small businesses have to pay, and then one by one giving exemptions to the CEOs who grovel in your office because their lobbyists bought them an appointment. That's the same crap that we pulled with COVID, where big companies were declared essential, and then anybody else who tried to open their business got freaking arrested and thrown in jail. All right, it's the same crap. All it is expanding market share for big business at the expense of the little guy, which, by the way, is kind of what got us into this mess to begin with. And so, yeah, I was pretty irate over that one yesterday as well. That's going on. Now, Nvidia is in the news yesterday. Nvidia has pledged to build a supercomputer factory entirely in the United States. Now we know what the ask was at that $1 million dinner. Jensen Huang went to a $1 million packed dinner at Mar-a-Lago a couple of weeks ago, and he came out of it with a exemption for semiconductors. Seems Jensen Huang's $1 million for dinner was money well spent. Next thing you know, Nvidia doesn't have to pay the tariffs. Oh, okay, they pay 20% instead of 145%, while small business still has to pay the 145%. See also earlier tirade. But now we know what Jensen had to give up in exchange for that reprieve. He had to promise to build a supercomputer factory entirely in the United States. Now, here's the thing. Nothing has actually been done. There's nothing on paper. There's just a promise. Yup, we said a thing. We're going to do a thing. We swear. Maybe we'll drag our feet just long enough, move some dirt around at the site, buy some land, and then, a new administration comes to power and we cancel the factory and it never happens anyway. We saw some of the same stuff with the CHIPS Act. All right. A lot of that money never got spent. A lot of those factories never got spent. They did just enough to get themselves the subsidies. And then, well, here we are. So now look, obviously things being built in the U.S., the reshoring of manufacturing, I'm all in favor of that. I'm glad NVIDIA made this announcement. I hope they build the factory. We desperately need a domestic semiconductor industry in the United States in a bad way. Like, people have no idea how badly we need it. You'll think the chip shortage and the car industry was bad after COVID. Just wait until you see what happens to everything if China invades Taiwan. Now, that being said, I don't think this NVIDIA factory is ever going to get built. I would love to be wrong about that, but this AI bubble is on life support. It's got a couple of months tops before this thing blows up. We're already seeing it with the CoreWeave IPO failing and Microsoft cutting their CapEx. I think Google is not far behind. And so this big $500 billion investment that has a lot of this Project Stargate vibe about it, it's really just a dog and pony show for the cameras. I don't know that it's really going to result in any factories getting built, any actual chips being made in the U.S., but I'd be happy to be wrong about that one. Meanwhile, we've got small business is suing to block the administration's tariffs. They're challenging the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, the IEPA. This is the Liberty Justice Center, which is kind of a right-leaning libertarian organization. They're suing in the U.S. Court of International Trade, saying that the president has exceeded his authority to unilaterally place tariffs. Look, governing by declaration of emergency is not new to the Trump administration. The last administration did it with climate change or whatever else they decided was suddenly an emergency, and therefore they don't have to follow the law. So the guys, they kind of have a point here, don't they? Isn't Congress supposed to be in charge of the whole taxes thing? Which sets up a whole different argument. What the heck is going on with Congress? My God, what a circus act that has turned into. So that one is going on. We've also got Jamie Dimon selling more JP Morgan stock. He's been doing that for a little over a year now. Two more big banks reported earnings, Bank of America and Citi, both beating on equities, trading revenue. All the banks are making a lot of money off of trading in stocks. We got a lot to talk about this morning, guys. Why don't we shrink my big melon of a head and let's see what's happening in the world of finance this morning. But before we do that, some shameless self-promotion. I have to say, your wildest dreams have come true. Nobody Special Finance is now on Spotify, as seen on the screen here, guys. If you're on YouTube and you go to those links down below and you scroll all the way down to the last one, there will be Follow Nobody Special on Spotify. So the streams every morning will be available. They won't be live. It'll be at about 10 a.m. Eastern time. I'll be uploading them every day. But that is one more way that you can get your daily fix of Melonhead, should you feel so inclined. And don't forget that like button and that subscribe button if you're new here while you're at it. All right, let's see what's going on in stocks this morning. The S&P is down 0.1 points. Nope, it just went positive. All right, so we were negative. We had the bear thumbnail. Stocks are moving to the upside, essentially unchanged at the moment. The Dow is in a similar boat, currently down 23 points, but pairing those losses looks to be heading in a positive direction at the moment, 0.06% lower. And the NASDAQ is modestly higher by about 29 points here, 0.15%. Stocks are going a whole bunch of nowhere this morning at the moment. Looking over at some of the international indexes, we had the German DAX was up 1.35% yesterday. The British FTSE up 0.88%. The CAC, the French index, that's up about 0.25%. The Spanish index was up 2%. So we got more green over in Europe, and the same thing in Asia here. We got the Nikkei was up 0.84% yesterday. We've got a mixed bag in China. Some of the indexes like the Shanghai was positive, just barely. The Shenzhen was a little bit lower. The Hang Seng up by 0.25%. China's national team, basically the government propping up the stock market, that's not news there. We talked a lot about that yesterday. I don't really trust the price discovery in Chinese stocks for the time being. Looking over at the U.S. dollar, we are still below that 100 threshold, 99.85, 99.86 now, up about 16 basis points, a slightly stronger dollar this morning, but the dollar has still weakened significantly in the last couple of weeks. And another chart you got to keep an eye on, the USD JPY. We are back below 143. We popped above that very briefly yesterday, currently at 142.9, well into the lows that we saw during that August panic. Keep an eye on that yen, guys, and the unwind of the yen carry trade. Right now, we are threatening to break down below that 142 level. And looking over at the bond market, we've got yields are a little bit higher on the long end of the curve, so some selling in bonds this morning, albeit tame selling. The 30-year Treasury is at 4.836. That's up almost 4 basis points. The 10-year, meanwhile, 4.378. That's up about a point and change here. The 2 years at 3.845, also up a point and change. And the 1 month is unchanged at 4.300. Kind of tame out there today, guys. Not a lot of movement. It's almost too quiet considering what's going on in the world. Let's look at commodities here. We've got gold is higher again this morning, $12.40 to the upside, $3,221 for spot gold. Spot silver, meanwhile, is down a couple of pennies here, 7 cents lower at $32.27 an ounce. I like the shiny. Copper, meanwhile, is a little bit lower here, down by about 2/3%. Platinum is up by 1.5%. Palladium is up 1%. And West Texas Intermediate is down about 0.25% here, $61.36 for May WTI futures. Looking over at the Bitcoin market this morning, $85,735 is priced on Coinbase. That's higher by about $1,100 versus this time yesterday. So Bitcoin had a pretty good day. Bitcoin, again, trading in lockstep with risk assets. Of note here, we did break above the 50-day moving average yesterday. So a little bit of encouragement from the technicals in the Bitcoin chart here. But overall, this is still a very ugly looking chart here. Until we get back above that 200-day moving average, I wouldn't put too much stock in that. Now, let's talk about the big one this morning. China orders Boeing jet delivery halt as trade war expands. This is the latest salvo, and this is kind of a big one here, guys. China has ordered its airlines not to take any further deliveries of Boeing jets as part of their tit-for-tat trade war that's seen U.S. President Donald Trump levy tariffs of as high as 145% on Chinese goods. That is, according to people familiar with the matter. Beijing has also asked the Chinese carriers to halt any purchases of aircraft-related equipment and parts from U.S. companies, the people said, asking not to be identified, discussing matters that are private. And again, when Beijing asks, that's an order. All right, because when Beijing asks and you don't, you tend to go missing for a little while. So this is not a politely worded, strongly suggested. This is don't from the Chinese government. The order came after China unveiled retaliatory tariffs of 125% on American goods this past week. The people said those levies on their own would have more than doubled the cost of U.S.-made aircraft and parts, making it impractical for Chinese airlines to accept Boeing planes. So that gets to the point there where I was saying, like, look, 125% tariff is a de facto ban in and of itself. Now, this chart is kind of interesting here. Let's see if we can make this a little bigger. This chart is showing how much of China's commercial airline fleet is made up of Airbus versus Boeing versus Comac. Airbus, that's the big European one. Boeing is shown in pink here. And then Comac, the yellow one, that's China's domestic airline maker. You can see here about half, a little less than half of the commercial fleet in China is made up of Boeing planes. And this ban also extends to parts. So this is going to be a big problem for Chinese airlines. This is not just going to be a hit to U.S. GDP. There are going to be planes falling out in the sky if they keep this up because they don't have enough parts to keep them running. And greedy airline executives are going to say, keep the schedule anyway. It's probably going to happen. Maybe that's a little doomy of me, but hey, the standoff also underscores that China is still relying on overseas suppliers for passenger aircraft to serve its population's demand for air travel, while Airbus is the more important supplier and Chinese carriers are counting on the domestically produced Comac C919 to supplement their narrow-body needs. Airlines still have hundreds of Boeing planes in their fleets that will require maintenance, repair, and replacement. Boeing stock not looking so good this morning, down 3.3% ahead of the opening bell, trading at $154. Boeing, they weren't quite out of the woods, but man, last year was just bad headline after bad headline for Boeing. And now they've got this to deal with. That company can't really seem to catch a break, although my heart doesn't exactly weep for them after the whole whistleblower winding up dead before he was scheduled to make a deposition in a case. Yeah, that whole thing. Also going on this morning, South Korea announces over $23 billion for chips sector as Trump tariffs on semiconductor imports loom. Look, I'm not going to get too much into the weeds on this one. The title pretty much says it all here. The South Korean government is going to subsidize their semiconductor industry. This is about a 25% increase versus what happened last year. The amount of support for the industry that came from the government last year, that 25%, that's pretty close to the tariffs that are being placed on these semiconductors. So South Korea is not retaliating. South Korea is biting the bullet. They're taking it here. And again, guys, just be careful of the propaganda you're consuming. Always be skeptical of these stories that you're hearing, because just last week, South Korea and Japan and China were supposedly getting together and figuring out how to fight the big bad orange man. That was pure BS. That story wasn't real. Also going on this morning, Trump floats temporary reprieve for autos as parts tariffs loom. Another case of the big guys get carve-outs. President Donald Trump said he is exploring possible temporary exemptions to his tariffs on imported vehicles and parts to give auto companies more time to set up manufacturing. Look, you've been talking about tariffs since you got elected. Haven't they had time to begin setting up manufacturing? So what's going to change now? But I digress. I'm looking at something to help car companies with it, Trump told reporters Monday in the Oval Office. They're switching to parts that were made in Canada and Mexico and other places, and they need a little bit of the time because they're going to make them here. I can't help but point out, he's saying they're switching to parts that were made in Canada and Mexico. Aren't those also countries that had tariffs placed on them? Not really sure what he's saying there. The president was asked what short-lived product exclusions he was considering, but did not specify how a long potential pause or lowering of auto levies would remain in place. He just floated the idea, guys. There was no specifics. Nothing has actually been done yet. The president's comments could potentially bring relief to automakers reeling from his duties on car and light truck imports, but they also inject further uncertainty into his tariff plans, which again are changing by the hour. Also going on yesterday, Nvidia to make AI supercomputers entirely in the United States, or so they say. The company is working with Foxconn on a supercomputer plant in Houston. Nvidia said it would start producing AI supercomputers that will be manufactured entirely in the U.S. a day after the Trump administration said tariffs are coming for semiconductor imports. The graphics chip maker said in a blog post Monday morning that it is working with manufacturing partners to design and build factories for domestic AI supercomputer production. This will be the first time that AI supercomputers, which are used to power data centers that solely process artificial intelligence, will be made completely in the U.S., Nvidia said. The move comes after the Trump administration officials said over the weekend that they are conducting a trade investigation into semiconductors. Chip and chip-enabled electronics will see new tariffs within a month or two, they said. Nvidia said it has commissioned more than 1 million square feet of manufacturing space to build and test its Blackwell chips in Arizona and AI supercomputers in Texas. The company's working with Foxconn, the world's largest contract electronics maker, on a supercomputer plant in Houston, and with Taiwan's Wistron on a plant in Dallas. So a lot of questions here. No details about when. They're mentioning that they're building these supercomputer factories for their Blackwell chips. That's the current generation of chips. So these factories are not going to be built in time to manufacture and test Blackwell, not even close. Scant details, nothing on paper, no actual funds spent yet, just a guy saying a thing on a blog post. So I'm very skeptical about this. Plus, NVIDIA doesn't manufacture things. NVIDIA owns the IP. They design them. So is NVIDIA getting into the chip fab business now? Is that what this story is? There's a lot of questions about this, a lot of details. And everybody's just like, oh, NVIDIA is building a supercomputer plant. Yay, trade war win. I've got questions about this. Let's just put it this way. NVIDIA stock did not react favorably to this one yesterday. It sold off a little bit on the news, although it ended up recovering over the course of the day, closing essentially flat. And it's pretty much unchanged here this morning at $110.73. Meanwhile, U.S. businesses are suing to block the Trump tariffs, saying trade deficits are not an emergency. Finally, we've got a challenge on this law that basically says if you declare an emergency, you can do anything you want. A group of 5 small businesses sued President Donald Trump on Monday, seeking to block new tariffs he's imposed on foreign imports in recent weeks. The lawsuit in the U.S. Court of International Trade alleges that Trump has illegally usurped Congress's power to levy tariffs by claiming that trade deficits with other countries constitute an emergency. Congress has not delegated any such power. Well, Congress has delegated that power. They just didn't very tightly define what an emergency is. The whole point of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act was to give the president that power. So I'm not sure if this challenge is going to work, but anything that challenges the authority of the executive branch, regardless of who's in the office, I'm down with that. But the suit alleges that IEEPA does not authorize the president to unilaterally issue across-the-board worldwide tariffs. The Liberty Justice Center, which is representing the owner-operated countries, said Trump's new tariffs of at least 10% on imports for most countries and higher rates for scores of other nations are devastating small businesses across the country. That is accurate. His claim of his claimed emergency is a figment of his own imagination. Trade deficits, which have persisted for decades without causing economic harm, are not an emergency, the suit says, nor do these trade deficits constitute an unusual and extraordinary threat. Now, I disagree with that statement that trade deficits are an unusual and extraordinary threat. Now, are they an emergency that totally throws out the separation of powers in America, that's a legitimate debate to be heard out in court. And I'm curious to see what the arguments are going to be. That being said, this whole governance by emergency, right? Like the last guy said climate change was an emergency and therefore he could do whatever he wanted without Congress. And, if you're sitting here saying, I like the guy who's in the Oval Office and therefore this lawsuit should be thrown out, ask yourself and be honest with yourself. If Kamala was in the White House doing the same thing, what would your opinion be? I'll be honest with you. I don't know the answer to that question. If Kamala Harris was in the White House pushing 145% tariffs, I don't know how I would react to that. Although if Kamala Harris was in the White House, I'd probably be in a fetal position in my basement sucking my thumb, just waiting for 4 years to be over with. But I digress. It's just worth asking yourself, guys. Imagine these powers with the other guy on the other side having them. Are you still okay with it? If the answer is no, then you probably shouldn't be okay with your guy having that power. Meanwhile, Jamie Dimon sells about $31.5 million worth of JP Morgan shares. Look, the CEO of the world's biggest bank has been dumping stock for well over a year. He just filed yesterday. He's selling even more. Now, this is something, again, he's been doing this for a while. He's planning on eventually stepping down as CEO. He's been in charge of JP Morgan for a long time here. They're working on their succession planning. So the argument is this is JP Morgan CEO just kind of repositioning. CEOs sell stock for a number of reasons. It doesn't necessarily reflect lack of confidence in the company. All those talking points. That being said, Jamie Dimon has been making some pretty alarmist statements in the press over the last couple of months, saying that stocks are overvalued, and then he's selling stock in his own company. Maybe that's worth paying attention to. Just throw them out there. You guys do what you want with them. Also going on this morning, guys, we got two more big bank earnings, and we're seeing this across the board with the big bank earnings. Bank of America stock traders notch record quarter and loan revenue rises. Look, another big bank. We saw the same thing with Goldman Sachs, the same thing with JP Morgan. They're making a lot of money off of stock volatility, and that's causing them to beat earnings. Almost every big bank has reported that. Bank of America, no exception. Stock is up 3.5%, 3.3% on that earnings beat, $37.96 now that the opening bell has rung. And we got the same thing at Citigroup. Citigroup profit beats estimates as stock trading revenue jumps 23%. Same thing, guys. Big banks making a lot of money off of stock volatility. Citigroup stock is up by 1.3% now that the opening bell has rung. So looking like a pretty good bank earnings. Bank earnings season is off to a good start this year, guys. And I just want to say thank you very much to Miss Viv B. Thank you so much, Viv, for supporting the channel and for gifting 5 Nobody Special Finance memberships. Welcome to the Melonheads, you 5 new members. Be sure and say thank you to Viv. Viv, thank you so much for everything you do for the channel. And Break My Wallet Motorsport, I love that name. It gets me every time. He says, Korea will always succumb to our demands as long as U.S. military is there to prevent reunification and then economic collapse. Yeah, reunification, that's a funny word for conquest, a funny way to describe conquest, right? China describes reunification all the time with Taiwan. I don't know that the whole unity thing, unity at gunpoint or under threat of murder, isn't really unity so much as it's beating into suppression. But that being said, yeah, Korea, countries that are wholly dependent on the U.S. military, especially after watching what happened in the Oval Office with the Ukrainians, all right? Like, set aside your personal feelings on the Ukraine war for a second and look at what happened. You had that blow up in the Oval Office between Zelensky and Trump and Vance. All right. So the fact that it's just always been this way, we've always had this military agreement, is not safe. The way we've always done things means nothing to these guys that are currently in charge. And so if you're South Korea and you watch that, and keep in mind that happened about 3 or 4 years after watching Afghans falling from the landing gear at Kabul airport, you better believe America's allies were like, maybe we don't want to perturb this alliance a little bit. Maybe we figure out another way to deal with the tariffs. And countries that are wholly dependent on the U.S. military, countries like South Korea and Taiwan, have not retaliated, not even a little bit, against these tariffs. I don't think that is a coincidence. I think you're right to point that out. Break your wallet, break my wallet. And again, guys, I just have to say the propaganda is extra thick these days. So that whole story last week of China, Japan, and South Korea, they're getting together. Oh my God, China, Japan, and South Korea can never agree on anything, but they all agree how much they hate Trump. It was a fake story. There's so much of that crap flying around. And again, our press is happy to repeat it because Orange Man bad. So just keep that in mind, guys. I agree. Thank you very much, Break My Wallet Motorsport, for supporting the channel. Hey, Robin RC Batsafe, welcome back, sir. Long time no see. Good morning to you, Mike. I appreciate the super chat. Welcome back to the channel. By the way, shoot me an email when you get a chance. I'm curious what's going on the other side of the pond. I know you manufacture, and I know you're dealing in Europe. Kind of curious what's being said. I think I have a pretty good idea what's being said in a lot of circles, but I'm interested in a first-person vantage point, a first-person point of view of what's going on across the pond right now. So shoot me a message when you have a chance, Mike, and thank you for supporting the channel. Welcome back, sir. And everybody else, thank you for having your coffee with the Melon Heads. Don't forget that like button and that subscribe button. And check out that link down below to Spotify. Again, I will be uploading the live streams just after completion every morning. So there's another way to get your Melon Head fix. Thank you so much for the super chats and the support of the channel, as well as you, my magnanimous Melon Heads on YouTube and Patreon. Thank you for supporting the channel. Links down below to all that good stuff, should you feel so inclined. Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. I love you guys. Everybody, till next time, live small and dream big.